events in March and April. In this series here in Tahrir, therefore, next month in April, we have a talk by Muhammad Tawfiq, novelist and diplomat, and he will be speaking on Tuesday, April 19th, here in Oriental Hall, and his talk is entitled Self-Translation, Faithful Rendition, or Rewriting. And in our parallel series at the new campus, the interdisciplinary series, our upcoming event is actually very close to this one next week on Monday, March 28th, and it is by my colleague, Ellen Kenny, who is Assistant Professor of Islamic Art and Architecture, and she will be lecturing on Islamic art and its intra-disciplinary translations. You know, just to remind you that these events are coming up soon if you would like to join us. I'm very pleased to be joined this evening by two very dear colleagues and friends with whom I have worked on more than one project, and hope to continue to be working on other projects, Omar Nagati and Beth Stryker. They are the co-founders of Cluster. Cluster is a Cairo Lab for Urban Studies, Training and Environmental Research. It was founded in 2011 in downtown Cairo as a platform for urban research, architecture, art, and design initiatives. Cluster engages critical theorization while being grounded in professional practice with an emphasis on participatory design processes. Let me very briefly introduce our speakers so I don't take much time. Omar Nagati, therefore, is a co-founder and principal, is a practicing architect, urban planner with over 25 years experience working in Cairo. He has been the recipient of a number of honors and awards, including representing Egypt in the 6th Architectural Design Exhibition, Venice Biennale. A graduate of Cairo University, he studied and taught at the University of British Columbia and University of California, Berkeley, with a special focus on informal urbanism. Nagati adopts an interdisciplinary approach to questions of urban history and design and engages in a comparative analysis of urbanization processes in developing countries. Nagati's practice spans a project in housing, institutional and interior design within Egypt and regionally, having particular emphasis on urban planning and community development. He has lectured widely on both Cairo, both locally and internationally. In Cairo, he has taught architecture and urban design studios at the Modern Sciences and Arts University and Cairo University, and is a frequent contributor to design reviews and juries. Beth Stryker, who is the co-founder, is an architect, curator, and artist. She has curated exhibitions and programs for the Downtown Contemporary Arts Festival in Cairo, Beirut Arts Center, Leslie Tonkono Artworks and Projects, the American Institute of Architects Center for Architecture in New York, where she held the position of Director of Programs, and the Museum of Contemporary Art in Chicago, among other venues. Her works have been exhibited widely, including shows at the Wexner Center for the Arts, the Walker Arts Center, and the Whitney Museum of American Art. She has been the recipient of numerous awards and grants, including from the Graham Foundation, the New York Foundation for the Arts, and the Ford Foundation. As I started off saying, I have personally collaborated with both Omar and Beth on more than one project, including their very successful symposia held here at AUC, one entitled Learning from Cairo that was held in 2013, and the other the Creative Cities Symposium in 2015, where I was responsible for a literary tour, and I thank them for making me discover this new potential career in the future. it was very enjoyable, and I learned a tremendous lot from it. We also collaborated on another very interesting project, Cairo's Cultural Cartography, that was held in 2014. And we are looking forward to more collaborative work with regard translation, as you may have detected from the subject of their lecture today. And we hope that today's talk will be the first step, if you will, towards developing a workshop on the very same topic. This evening's talk is entitled Towards Developing a Critical Urban Lexicon, Cairo Urban Resource Library, and the Challenge of Translation and Terminology. So without further ado, please help me welcome Beth and Omar.
Thank you, Samia. Thank you, Samia. Thank you so much. Such a generous introduction. We're delighted to be here. We feel already at home. We've been here several times, both as speakers and organizers. I would like to thank the Center for Translation Studies at the AUC for inviting us, and my special thanks to Samia. As she said, we're already partnering in a number of other projects. The talk today is, we were requested to talk about an ongoing project. In fact, it's not a finished product, it's something in progress, and we would like to solicit your input, because this is something we've been working on the past few years. And the way we structured this presentation in two parts. The first part, we will be talking a little bit about the context. In 2011, with all the event and political turmoil, there's a lot of energy that popped out, and we were fortunate to be part of a number of archiving and documentation projects, one of which is Cairo Urban Initiative Platform. We're going to be talking about it. And a subsidiary of that, or an offshoot of that, was Cairo Urban Resource Library, which is really the anchor project for what we talk today about, the urban lexicon. So it's sort of almost a narrative or a story that we'd like to tell you what happened and how we progressed from one to the other, and where we're at now and where we'd like to go further. And again, solicit your feedback as expert and as also practitioners. The first part is basically in what we refer to as the city in flux. In 2011, with the fall of the regime and this sort of condition of political vacuum, if you will, where the state was very weak and vulnerable, and communities and individuals felt very empowered by this condition of revolution and the absence of security and absence of order, if you will, or alternative order emerging that time. So we witness both sense of violence and destruction, if you will, but we also witness the emergence and the proliferation of a huge number of initiatives, art, media, and activism, and advocacy, and so on, and design, you name it. People just started to, to use the cliche, claim or reclaim their cities and public space. So we witnessed things ranging from, graffiti art to, people engage in art in public space, dancing, the metro, choreography. We also witnessed things like street vendors, so both positive and not too positive, depends on you look at it. But there was definitely a new sense of urban citizenship, if you will, where people kind of felt empowered and were expressing their new emergent agency, if you will, in multiple forms. So one of the things we wanted to do, and this is just examples that it's now almost given. Everybody knows many, the Mahattat or Decaf, or Decaf even precede that, but there's media, there are new books and started to do downtown, initiative, both established and ongoing, projects everywhere working with local communities. So what happened is we realized that this moment is a passing, it's a fleeting moment, that eventually, that was in 2012, eventually law and order will be restored. And many of these manifestations, whether we're talking about grounded practice like graffiti wall, as good testimony is happening in Muhammad Mahmoud, will be painted over, or maybe the building will be torn down. or street vendors would be kicked out. And also many of these art initiatives and creative initiatives that enjoyed this moment of opening, if you will, in Faraga, because there was, you don't need a permission to do art in public space back then. You don't need a permission to do a performance or to take a photo. Eventually, this condition will change, and the law will be restored. Not only that many of these initiatives emerged in part due to the international support. Cairo and Egypt was a very trendy, very sexy topic. The influx of foreign support back then. And we also anticipated that eventually some of this support will dry out or will be more restricted. So we wanted to quickly capture this moment, if you will, to document it. And we were involved in two projects. One of them I'm not going to talk about a lot. It's archiving the city of flux. It's a mapping of some of these informal practices in public space, from street vendors to graffiti wall to people building highway exit on the ring roads in absence of government. So all these things were, for us, was incredible opportunity to see the extent to which communities, the extent to which people would do if state was temporary, not absent, but order suspended. What would happen if the order is suspended? What is the people capacity? To what extent are they willing to go? What are their resources? What are organizational skills? What are the funding resources that they have? So what if you leave people do whatever they want, if you will? So we wanted to capture this, and it was an incredible laboratory to test that. So we put that we took a lot of photos and interviews and videos and time lapses and maps and so on. And we produced a small publication as a sample of this project called Archiving the City in Flux, that sort of as a testimony to this the moment. So that was one project. Then the other project that's more relevant to our discussion today is a parallel initiative, but instead of looking at practices on the ground or the physical or the tangible manifestation of this moment of flux, looking at the initiatives or the organizations that emerged or were emerging at that time. So we did a list, almost like a directory, and Beth will talk more about it, whereby we identified 7 categories, just to start with. As a sort of analytical kind of process. Art was one of them, design and architecture was one, advocacy was one, media was one, and so on and so forth. And we start to list who's who in the scene in Cairo. And so we saw, like, what's the name of organization, what's their activity, range of activities, whether it's in art or design or media, area of focus, the size of the organization, of course, the location, their mission statement, also what are the resources that they have, which is very important to discussion today. If they have a screening room or a dark room or a library, and so on and so forth, a rehearsal room, and so on and so forth. And we also start to identify the events, and we made a calendar. So what we did is basically created we work with a developer to develop a software, a platform, whereby we can list and map these initiatives by category, and then we'll see how we can look by name or by category and by resource and so on, as well as a calendar of events. And the purpose of this platform was twofold. In addition document, to foster communication and collaboration and potential overlap between. So instead of reinventing the wheel every time you want to do this, you can see who's in the scene, and you can sort of try to work within that. It's sort of the ecosystem of the art scene. And the other purpose for that was to think of resources as something that is scarce and eventually vanishing, as I said. So how can we develop a system to share resources? So if we have a library in our own space, we can share our library with others. So how to make it visible and accessible. And that was sort of the segue to our second project that we'll talk about it today, which is our Urban Resource Library. So basically, the Cairo Urban Initiative Platform offered an opportunity to map out the resources among civil society organizations in particular. So we have a very small library, a couple of thousand books, but if we have 10 libraries, everybody has few thousand, then we all together can have a medium-sized library, and they're all specialized in art or design or literature or cinema and so on and so forth. As long as we're able to systematize the cataloging system and make it and open up to the public during certain hours. That was the only two conditions. To adopt one system, and we adopted, as Beth will show you, the Library of Congress system, and B, as a second term, is to make sure that this collection is open or accessible to public users or researchers during certain terms. It could be non-circulating, could be certain hours, but at least you render this kind of treasures that are collecting dust and nobody knows about it, render it visible to outside the public. So that was the concept and behind this project. So I think that now maybe I'll hand over to you, Beth, and you can just go through the two projects, and then we'll take it from there and talk about the lexicon. Yeah.
Okay. So this is just a screenshot. Obviously, this system is live, and you can see the URLs at the bottom, the equipcairo.org, and so you can go online and have a look at the project. We started developing it by doing a series of networking meetings with, it was between 35 to 40 of the individuals representing initiatives from the different sectors that Omar mentioned. So we had people from the art and culture scene, architecture, urbanism, media, advocacy, academia, and so forth. And we began by bringing everybody together because we wanted to sort of collectively think about what kind of a tool would be useful to be able to share resources, and also to make sure that this system actually represented the organizations on their own terms. So these are just some early meetings that we had. This was in 2012. And then we produced this online system. So again, at the bottom, you can see all the categories that were mapped. And we began, again, we had maybe 35 to 40 initiatives in the beginning. Now there are over 300 represented in this system. The system is fully bilingual. And one of the things that was interesting when we were building this was because we wanted to work with materials that the organizations themselves use to describe themselves. It turned out that the vast majority of this material was in English. So one of the first things we did was we had to translate quite a lot of the material that people had provided us from English to Arabic in order to create this as a bilingual system. And again, here you can see the listings are by initiative. You can also sort them by what type of initiative. You could, for example, just pull up a map of art and culture organizations. You can also search by resource if you want to see who has a library, for example. And so right now we have over 70% of the traffic is coming from Egypt, but it's also interesting that maybe 10% of that is looking at this site on the Arabic side. The vast majority are looking at this in English. So this was one of our early attempts to create a tool, as Omar was saying, to be able to share resources. Now, in the same networking meetings, we also raised this idea of how can we also, let's say, network together all of the libraries. And so we initiated the project, the Urban Resource Library. This was back in 2012. And we partnered at that time, and using our own collection as the base for the idea. So we have, let's say, over 1,000 books in our library. 1,000 on site. And so how can we make these accessible to the public? And again, by linking all these other small collections that exist within the different independent organizations, create a larger resource that would be available to the public. So we started by partnering with ADEF, which was the Arab Digital Expression Foundation, and one of their mandates is to work on this Arabization of content. So the first system that we developed with ADEF was based on OpenBiblio, so it's open source platform. Again, it's bilingual Arabic-English, and it's a fairly straightforward cataloging system for cataloging library materials. So these again are screenshots. This platform is live. It's at cairo-url.org. And let's say we spent maybe the first year developing the system, uploading all our books. CIC was working on a parallel project at that time. The idea was that we would work with the architecture and urban organizations. They would work with art and culture, and ultimately you'd be able to search across the databases. unfortunately, at the end of the year, we were told that we would not be able to use this system to add additional collections. It was a limitation of the platform as it had been developed at that time. And so the project with CIC sort of came to a halt at that point, and we made a decision that we would then start to look at what other software might be available out there that would already do these things that we needed this system to do. That is, that would be a collection of different libraries under one umbrella. And again, we shared the same librarian with CIC, and we shared the same mandate. So when we then decided to move over to a new platform, which is the system that we're now developing, and this was based on an already existing system called 247lib.com, all the organizations from the art and culture side and the urban side, we all came together to try and now come together in one shared platform. And this has been about a year and a half we've been developing the system, and the way that we were able to do this is this software already existed. It had support for a number of different languages, but not for Arabic. So we made an agreement with them that in exchange for them giving us a license that we could use and we could share with all the constituent libraries, that we would Arabize the software for them. I don't think we quite realized what we were getting into at the time, but so again, it's been about a year and a half maybe that we've been doing this, because it was basically, and I'll just show you, this is the back end of the system, so this is for the librarians, this is the content management system, but we did all the translation for the interface and for the many thousands of error messages that might pop up, and all of the help files and all of this sort of thing, just so that this system is entirely accessible now in Arabic as well as in English and whatever languages they had already developed it. So again, this is just giving you a sense of the back end of the system. Some of the things we also have been working on developing with them are the ability to search not only in Arabic, but also using transliteration. And we had a wonderful developer here in Cairo who had been working with AUC. She had been the head of their IT for library systems, who helped us to develop this back end. And we are currently, so we have been working with all the libraries now to catalog their systems. We do library workshops where we train people on the system. Our librarian supports the different initiatives. We have maybe 10 libraries in Cairo at this time who are part of it. And now we have gotten interest from people in Beirut and in Amman. And so we're looking at this platform becoming more of a regional platform. And a lot of this is very technical, but if anybody is really interested in the software or in joining the library system, we'd be very happy to talk to you after the lecture. But let's see. So this is just to give you a little preview. We haven't yet launched the public interface for this system. This is basically what the public will see once it's entirely launched. And again, we have started this as now a regional platform with people. This is the list of current organizations that we're participating with on the project. And I would say the majority of the organizations in Cairo have now uploaded their books. We have over, 7,000 books, I think, in the system now, and it's still ongoing, the cataloging process. So again, these are just some quick screenshots of, it's a standard cataloging system, but you can also, with this system, search a singular collection, so you could go to cluster and just search our collection, or you can see where a book is across the entire system, so you can find a book that might be in another library in Cairo or even in Beirut or Amman. And let's see, I'll just flip through these, and then I think I'll turn it over to Omar to talk about sort of the next phase of the project.
Okay, so what we had envisioned that parallel to this platform that is basically a repository of collections is to also engage in this kind of knowledge dissemination program by trying to think of the question of translation. Most of us working in the urban studies scene are faced, and I'm sure that's something that other disciplines can share. was faced with a number of challenges, and I'm going to just go through them and see like why this issue of lexicon, a critical urban lexicon, it could be critical art lexicon, it could be critical literary lexicon is important. There are a number of issues, but I just wanted to just start with this very funny, and I'm sure all of you have confronted with this sign with translation error. Even the center of the National Center for Translation kind of cannot really get it right. And it was this level of I don't know if it's mediocre or lack of perfection is something that's really frustrating, because to us it's important to, it's good to have a vision or a purpose, but it's good to implement it in a way with high standards. The question of standard is also very important to us. So to us, one of the main issues was the gap, and in urban studies in architecture is a very big gap between the centers of production of knowledge, if you will, academic institutions in the north, and local discourse. And some of the terms, by the time they be introduced and circulated in local context, even in academic context in Cairo, in architecture, things get distorted and translated in different ways, and so we're sort of lagging behind, and that's, I'm sure, is something that a lot of people can identify with. So that's issue number one. Issue number two is the interdisciplinary nature of urban studies. Urban studies, maybe comfortably or uncomfortably, sits at the intersection of multiple disciplines, from geography and architecture, from the spatial kind of disciplines, to anthropology and sociology and political science, and then history. So there, at least, and cultural studies, gender studies, and the spatial terms in the 90s, as some of you may know, have been really sort of the main epistemological framework. Question of the body and the border and the mapping and the margin. These are all spatial terms that are borrowed, and particularly in the French post-Marxist kind of term like Foucault and Bourdieu and Lefebvre, and then migrated to gender studies and cultural studies, and came back. So there's a lot of kind of terms that are going back and forth and taking new meaning and new definition. And we are in the urban studies sometimes find ourselves almost kind of trying to negotiate, like, what exactly do we mean by mapping, for example. And I'm going to talk about some of these terms that are. So we, as cluster, but also other groups who are involved in, producing some even articles, are sometimes faced with how we translate that. If we're really interested of having a bilingual document, then we have to find a way so that's the interdisciplinary is another thing. The third one is the regional discrepancy or inconsistency. In the Arab world, you have at least 3 or 4 different traditions. You have the Al-Maghrib, the Morocco, Algeria, Tunisia, and so on and so forth. And they have their own, mostly francophone based translation. And then you have Al-Mashriq, the Lebanon, Syria, the Levantine. And you have Egypt tradition, maybe Egypt and Sudan, one region. And now you have also emerging the Gulf countries. Gulf region is also involved in publishing a lot of literature. And terms as simple as public space, that you think it's a no-brainer, it's inconsistent. There's at least 4 or 5 different translations of public space, and I'll show you some of these translations. Yeah. So again, it's not only the gap between the production and the local discourse, but also the regional variation is something that is, for us, as we're non-specialists, of course, maybe some of you too, it's not news, but it's really frustrating for us to find that some of the terms are not consistent. Then there's another important dimension to this lexicon, which is more of like a political agenda, or the activist side. Terms in the official discourse, such as informal housing, it's translated as ashwaiyat. I'm just giving one example. An ashwaiyat is a very derogatory term. It's fi idana, yani there is some sort of demonization and criminalization. So to us, we never use in our publication in ashwaiyat, we say informal housing, informal development, informal areas, because as you probably know, the language itself sort of informs the policy and practice. So in other words, by trying to develop a parallel or alternative or critical lexicon, you're also challenging the main discourse, and in doing so, you're contesting the policy and the paradigm, right? So the mindset of the official mindset towards, in that case, informality needs to change. And one way to challenge it, to change it, is to redefine it and re-articulate the meaning by showing the potential, that it's not all bad, there is a lot of good things about it, and so on and so on. So translation, in that sense, has also a political agenda from our perspective. Then also there is the digital media in the past 15 years or so, which generated incredible amount of writing, whether bloggers or online newspapers, or even people who are self-publishing like ourselves. So there is this kind of incredible proliferation of text that is in a way a good thing, multiplicity, but also creates a challenge to try to find consistency, because if everyone finding their own way to translate a term, because there's no established translation, then you'll find this kind of marketplace of 20 translators of the same term. So there's more pressing need to really find a way to bring some of these players in the field and sit around the same table and try to find, with the help of translation experts. And then finally, of course, there's the Google translation, which is incredibly absurd. And all of us receive when we email all this kind of Egyptian menu, evacuated chicken and mixed authority and all these kind of things. But even the official signs are hilarious, because people use Google Translate, and it creates not only confusion, this is like, it's changed your way of thinking. So I did a quick exercise to look at 5 terms in the urban studies field, and I'm just going to go through them as a sort of a conclusion of this presentation, then we can maybe talk about them in depth together. So mapping, if you put mapping in a Google Translate, it will give you the term, it will translate as rasm al-khara'it, which is like drawing maps, right? Which is very misleading, because mapping, in our understanding of our practice, it's basically documentation, but from a spatial perspective. So instead of documentation, making a list, you're making documentation on a map. So it's spatial or geographical way of understanding. So tawthiq makani, if you will. That's, to my view, the more appropriate contextual way of understanding mapping. But if you talk to somebody who was more heavyweight in linguistics, he will say, actually mapping by root should be ikhtitat. So here is a little bit of interesting discrepancy. So which one you adopt? Should we coin ikhtitat and then everybody uses it? Or should we find a more contextual meaning? And so this is something that we're kind of seeking help from our colleagues and the translation expert. Territoriality, which is something that is also a very interesting term. It's technically territoriality. Google translated as iqlimiyya, because it goes back to iqlim, territory. But territoriality in our field means the way people claim certain area, like for example, street vendor or a shop owner who claims the sidewalk as part of their turf, if you will. So that's territoriality, right? So it has nothing to do with region whatsoever, right? And the technical term in this part of social science is al-hududiyya, which is a very, very heavy term, and nobody would understand, equally to ikhtitat. So it's almost also another dilemma. So which one will you adopt, and how would you go about bridging this gap? Then informality, as I said, informal economy and formal market have a very positive, somehow, or at least not negative term. It's translated as اقتصاد غير رسمي or أسواق غير رسمية, which is okay, and it's sort of more of a literal translation. But if you put informal areas or informal housing, then you get iskan ashwai or مناطق عشوائية. It's going to completely turns into something very negative, and the randomness, the chaotic, the whole sort of underlying meaning of disorderly and malaise and all this kind of associated meaning with ashwayat. So, and then of course we have the, I think I skipped public space, I'm sorry. Public space is, here is like 4 or 5 different variations. فراغ العام, الفضاء العام, المجال العام. مجال العام الموز, I think more of a public sphere, but sometimes often encounter مجال العام, and الحيز العام, مساحة العامة, right? So again, this is also, I think, a clear example of regional as also interdisciplinary variation and conflict, if you will. And then finally, the term gentrification, which is one of the most stubborn terms that never able to do. And it's now becoming more and more current in the last few years, particularly what's happening downtown, and everybody's describing anything. Everybody's painting their window is gentrifier, and it's kind of oversimplification of the term. And then gentrification also, if you research it, you'll find two sets of definitions. One on the positive side, which has to do with the physical upgrading or improvement. So تحسين, ارتقاء, تطوير, ترميم, تأهيل, and so on and so forth. So these are all, of course, it depends on the context of the sentence. And I'm using here UN Habitat and United Nations literature to harvest this definition. And then there is, if you look at the social dimension of it, is very negative. So the social displacement. So إحلال طبقي, تغيير الأحياء الفقيرة على أحياء سكنية أرقى, ارتفاع المستوى الاجتماعي للأحياء, and then برجزة, which I think are very interesting, come from bourgeoisie. So because gentry is sort of the landed gentry, the class who are bourgeoisie and so on and so on. So Bargaza is a very interesting term. Anyway, so these are very simple kind of example. I just chose a few examples to communicate our intention, and then what we aim is in the next 6 months or so, in partnership with the Center of Translation Studies and the AUC, to organize the first workshop. And to start to bring together practitioners and academics from the urban side, or urban studies, and maybe political science also, along with experts in translation and also linguists, and maybe have a number of sessions whereby every session we choose an area or a set of terms along certain categories. And then brainstorm and discuss, and I'm sure there's a process, a methodology that we're not aware of digging deep and trying to find the root and trying to look at the context. Some of these terms also we have to trace the genealogy, the lineage of some of these terms, like right to the city, for example, started out in the 80s, late 80s and 90s in Latin America as part of a very particular political and urban condition. It's very different from the Middle East. And then it migrated to the North and Europe and North America, took a different term, and now it became a global term, United Nations and World Urban Forum and so on and so forth. So we need also to look at the sort of how some of these terms migrate, and every term they take different meaning and how they apply to our local context. Our at least preliminary aim is to, once we start to develop these groups of lexicon terms, to post it on the pilot project, the libraries project that Beth just described, and also link it to a set of bibliography related to these terms. So if somebody is interested in gentrification, he or she will not only find maybe not only one definition, maybe a number of definitions, but also they can also push the button and get linked to 20 books that are available on these 10 libraries that could also relate to that term. So it becomes sort of an extended support system for researchers and scholars, but also available to lay persons who are interested. The other thing that we're not equipped to decide, but is it something that should be open to, like a wiki thing, to available to, open to participation from wider public or not? This is also a question mark that we were not able to answer, because it's a different technology, but also it's a different management system to open it to other people, like the urban dictionary and so on and so forth. I think this is what we have, and we would like to stop here and get your feedback. And if you have questions, suggestions, we're happy to. Beth, you want to add something?
No, that's good.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Can always use your help. So any questions, suggestions, comments?
I'm curious, as you said that most of the people who consult the platform do so in English. How do you account for that? That only 10% consult in Arabic?
I mean, why do I think that is? Or, yeah, she's asking me why, you know, I had mentioned that maybe 10% of the people looking at the Cairo Urban Initiatives platform are looking at it in Arabic as opposed to in English, and she's asking how do we account for that? And I mean, honestly, I find it very confusing, and I don't have a good answer. I mean, I know that.
Does it have to do with the circuit itself? I mean, who's talking to who?
Right. Well, it also surprised us, like I said, that the materials themselves were originally in English. So I don't know if it's that it tends to be that the audience for, let's say, cultural events and so on, because I think at this point, you know, Quip has two sides to it, as Omar said. There's an events calendar and there's the directory. The directory is very stable, doesn't really change unless an organization shuts down or moves. And so the most dynamic part of it is the calendar. So I would assume that most people coming there on a regular basis are coming to look at events and things. So it may be who's the audience for the events that are being put on by these initiatives. I don't really have a good answer. I don't know if you do, but
why do people search?
Why is so much of the audience looking at Quip looking at it in English as opposed to on the Arabic side?
And does it have to do with the network itself? Who's talking to whom?
Yeah.
That it's actually not reaching out to people who may want to consult it in Arabic, but simply don't know that it exists.
I mean, it may be we need to do an outreach campaign specifically in Arabic or targeting the Arabic press or.
But I think also we could do a better, but when we started Quip, the Cairo Urban Initiative platform, we were sort of focused mostly on downtown. In the beginning, that was our own circle, right? And then we started to broaden it, like, you know, by extended network. So people who know somebody, so it's almost like becoming almost like a little clan, right? So we have Heliopolis and Maadi and Muhandisin. But if you look at Cairo, demographically, 70% of the people in Cairo live in informal areas, right? And in these informal areas, there are tons of initiatives. You can call them cultural or developmental or activist, but these are initiatives that should be recognized and documented and mapped and also represented. And if you do that, then I think the traffic and will change. So I think it's in part our own starting point. I don't think it's the end game. I mean, it's definitely open. And we have, for example, Art al-Lawa, but that's one. Right, but I'm sure that if you go
more
to
than one out there, but yeah.
I'm sure there are tons. If you go to Manshiat Nasser or Imbaba or you name it, a lot of organizations are working on the ground doing incredible work, and including art and culture and education and training and so on and so forth. And so there is, you know, there is opportunity to engage this and document it and add it. Yeah.
And I will add to that the next phase of this project, we would like to ideally start to develop this project in other provinces, and so maybe we also, once we start to do that, the audience for it will change. I think we'll see.
I'm wondering if what we see now as the state sort of reclaiming its public space has any negative impact on the kind of project that you pursue, especially that you're planning to take it to the provinces. This idea of documentation, is it being challenged maybe by this reclaiming of public space by the state?
Oh, by the state. Yeah, I think, yes. I mean, I think there are two parts of this. Of course, we're living in, we call this condition restoration of order, sort of euphemism. So instead of city in flux, it's moment of restoration, all right? So this restoration, I think, imposes two sets of restrictions. One, on the ground. So you're less able to take photos. Try to have 10 people walk in the street taking photos. Somebody will stop you and ask you who you are. Simple as that, right? Then let alone try to organize an event or, you know. Of course, we all know that a lot of cultural organizations are also facing challenges in terms of what they can and cannot do and the permits and so on. So there is this. And then there is also another set of restrictions as on an organizational level. So as a civil society organization, you are also less able to practice in the same way, let's say, like 3 years ago. So what kind of project you can do, frameworks for funding, permits, legal status, all these kind of things. So I think from both sides, there are, of course, less room to maneuver. Now, that I think the challenge is to find a way to adapt, to be resilient, to adapt your practice without compromising your principle, to be able to continue your mission, but maybe redefining your mode of practice. I mean, that's sort of a very politically correct of saying it, yeah. For example, we are working with on a project, collaborating with the Cairo governorate. And we've done that 2 years ago. And because we work in public space, we have to get a permit, right? We have to get approvals from the governor's office and the deputy governor and Rais al-Haid, the district chief and all. And that makes it important to frame your work in a way that they find it not only okay, but positive. They find something in it for them to be on board, right? So I'll give you just a quick example, right? We're doing a project. We did a couple of projects relating to, we have a project called Passageways, Mamarrat, Wust al-Balad, where we're interested in mapping them. As you see, we're obsessed with mapping. So we mapped them, we documented them, and then we proposed 2 of them as pilots to develop them as spaces, for public spaces that are more diverse and inclusive. And you may say democratic, right? Because you bring more constituents, right? Not only men, but also, you know, gender mix, social mix, age mix, and so on and so forth. Physical ability, all these kind of requirements. So how to make the public space more democratic and more inclusive. So now, okay, if you go to the governor's office and you say, I want to make public space more democratic, I don't think it's a very smart thing to do. But you can say, okay, obviously the Cairo governorate is interested in upgrading and developing downtown. So here is a common ground to start with. Your Excellency, we're also interested in developing our ground. Another point is that if you manage to get support, in that case also support from the Danish Institute in Cairo, so you're not also burdening the government with financials. We're also bringing on board some funding, right? And then you make being transparent, so you bring the funding agency with the governors and they sit together. So you're making everything for them easy to make a decision on your favor, right? You can still do a progressive project, to my view, right? But you have to frame it in a way, it's more of a tactical move, yeah. So I think it's just the short answer to your question, you have to be strategic on what you want to do, but you have to also be tactical and to have the right. And this is a moment of restoration, a moment of reform, if you will. So you want to work in the cracks of the system as opposed to confronting the system. It's not a moment of revolution yet. So, but this is sort of a little bit of hypothetical. But I think there are ways still to continue what we're doing, even if you have to limit things, maybe you have to edit things. But at the end of the day, I don't think we'll stop completely, and I hope so. You want to add something?
I think that's pretty thorough.
Okay.
In terms of developing terminology, I sense, though I've never been involved in it myself, in any way professional, but I sense that it's a major concern of many international organizations. And you mentioned habitat.
Mm-hmm.
And yet at the same time, you also pointed out how unsatisfactory, from your perspective, many of the terms that have been coined are. Is this because there really isn't a developed methodology? And are you yourselves taking on that task? And then how you go about developing the best terms for new terminological concepts? Or is it because these international organizations, Habitat, the United Nations, whatever, actually work despite their overwhelming, impression they project of competence, actually aren't that competent, and throw these things out that, depending perhaps on the individual decision of a certain translator of a certain document, which then just takes it up into the mix and is made sacred. But perhaps you don't know that. But anyway,
yeah, I don't know how they work actually. I assume they have sort of I'm sure they have professional translators, but the method we don't have for sure. Yeah, that's why we're partnering with the Center of Translation that you see, because we would like to develop and learn from them, develop a process whereby these terms are translated according to a method, what we do have is we know the terms that are, we have the DOE, and we know that the things that are hard to translate are inconsistent, but what we can do is we kickstart the process and convene the professionals and the practitioners on one side and the experts in linguistics and translation on the other side, and help facilitate the process. But we definitely don't have the know-how. I mean, I don't know if you want to.
And we also, and then of course the platform, and the idea being to share it through the platform. And one of the things that we've been talking about is how will we share this information? Will it be that we come up with some terms that, you know, we then are going to suggest these are some, or are we going to do something where there's going to be a collective feedback process using the platform where people can sort of vote on terms or comment on terms or add additional terms. So this is also something that we're trying to figure out as a next step. And again, we're very open to advice about if you've seen things that work or don't work, or people want to participate. That's one of the reasons that we're here, to sort of open this up in this conversation. But we don't have the answers really right now. I think we're definitely looking to the Center for Translation Studies for the lead on this aspect of the project.
Is the idea that once you develop this lexicon, then you hope that it will be, the terminology will be adopted, if not throughout the Arab world, at least in this region? I would just like to point to the in France, the Académie Française, over the years has done an enormous amount of work to resist, for example, Anglicisms coming into the language, and they have had committees developing Gallic terms for things which have been disastrous, and most of which have never been adopted. I mean, how do you see this, the lexicon you come up with eventually being adopted widely, or is that not your ambition?
Okay, I think we're definitely not in a position to claim authority here. I mean, the Magma al-Lagawi is, I think, the equivalent of what you're talking about. They have their own mandate, and they have their own, I'm sure, program of translation, and I'm not aware of where they stand. But what we see is on the ground that things are already being published. Like if you look at, you know, bloggers, Cairo Observer, even Madamas, they are already engaged in an urban discourse, whether we like it or not. And there is no reference, particular reference to every term. So you find the same topic being discussed in Arabic using different translations. So we'd like to start from the bottom up. We say, okay, even among our circle or the civil society organizations, you know, the 30 groups who are working on urban issues on the ground, they are not necessarily academic institutions, but they are actually working on the ground. And they are publishing stuff on a very small scale. How can we at least, let's say, coordinate or synchronize our efforts so that we, as a collective together, on the same page? I think it's as simple as that. But we're definitely not trying to create a parallel authority for translation. We don't have, I mean, we're not trained, and we're not even interested in doing that. But I think there is something, and you can see from our other project, we really start from the ground and work our way up. And I think systematization involved sometimes a very, very simple organizational thing and makes things much easier. But somebody needs to put their head and create a framework for it. Maybe if we're lucky, and maybe, I don't know, we're lucky or not lucky, but maybe the state would be interested, and maybe we can partner with them. Maybe they see in our effort and attempt they can, you know, engage that and maybe scale it up to something more institutionalized. But you know, the internet is full of lexicons and dictionaries that are grassroots, let's say, right? Urban lexicon, and some of them are funny, some of them are interesting, but it is a mode of communication. So if, you know, 10 people working on the same topic just start to talk to each other and say, let's agree to use in gentrification the term social displacement, I think that's already, to me, a first step. It doesn't have to be formally recognized by authority, linguist authority as the, but at least it will make things easier in terms of communication. So we have the same publication for the next couple of years, at least using consistent term. I mean, this is at least my understanding of this endeavor, but maybe it could be taken further, but I don't know, maybe Sami, you can add.
Actually, to follow up on what you have been saying, that many of these terms are contextual,
Mm-hmm.
but they also come with a baggage. They have their own histories and genealogies,
Mm.
etc., which people are not aware of.
Mm.
And I think for this kind of lexicon to be useful and not just, a one-to-one
Mm-hmm.
kind of list,
Mm.
that this means that and that, and we've agreed to all that,
Mm.
is to actually provide people with the contextuals.
Mm.
So there will be a thick translation,
Mm.
as I would say,
Mm.
not just a one-to-one, but perhaps a paragraph
Mm.
on each
Mm-hmm.
term
Mm-hmm.
that historicizes the word or the word. So, and actually offer people reason, differences. It has been translated as such, but also as such. This seems to imply X, just as you demonstrated now with Ashwaye.
Mm.
That actually you are sort of politically implicated
Mm.
when you choose Ashwaye over something else.
Mm.
That you're making a political choice in translation. And I think that translators are not necessarily aware of that as they sort of translate. They just, they may, and we have translators in the room, may go to the root and say, well, it should be X as you showed in some instances, but not necessarily thinking of the politics behind that particular
Mm.
method. But I think it's a very ambitious project. It transforms it from, a dictionary really, to an annotated kind of a project where each term would have its own history embedded
Mm.
in the lexicon, and not just its own history in English, but it's also its parallel history of translations into Arabic and what they imply, and then offer the translators this range of choice so that they know that, if you use this, you are going to be considered X, but if you use that, you're going to be considered, it's just a thought, but I think that would be very useful, because ultimately, I don't think we're ever going to agree on the use of one term, but at least we can offer people the choices and what they signify when we make them.
I think this relates back to Humphrey's comment as well on Habitat and the UN about thinking about who your audience is and not using terms that alienate people, and opening up a space for discussion and conversation. So, we have these really detailed conversations that nobody ever hears about on language in Arabic and in English when we publish articles around gender, around urban space, around sexuality, and very often, actually, interestingly, when we come to translate and use certain terminology in English, we revert to this very PC and in some ways anglicized terminology that people actually don't always relate to. And when we're quoting people, we have an issue of, do we use the language they used in Arabic and translate it directly, and then put a note? And we've started doing this thing where we asterisk it and at the bottom say, this is a contested term, some people use this word, the person we spoke to and quoted used this word, and kind of trying to open up a space for debate around why we've chosen a certain word over another. But we actually thought in the last few weeks about publishing some of those conversations that we have internally among, between Arabic and English about how we translate words, because I think the process of that is somehow more interesting than the lexicon you come up with at the end. Why do we use certain words in certain situations? Why do we switch it when we think about who we're speaking to or writing for? Or in a certain language, we might choose a particular word that's more careful. So yeah, it's something that we've started thinking about publishing at Madda, like regularly once a month, picking something that we've had intense debate over and talking about why we've chosen certain words in certain contexts. So yeah, I'd be really interested in maybe we can meet and discuss how we do that also with you sometime. Cool.
I think Madam Moss is already implicated.
Yes, we've already tried to rope Lena and Paula in, but yeah, we would love to talk to you more about it.
Yeah. Thank you. Yes, please. Can you pass the mic, please? Microphone. No. Okay. Hi, guys. So, you have a question? Oh, okay. I'm sorry. I thought you had. Okay.
Do we have models, other models? I mean, urban lexicons in other languages, from English into, I don't know, Spanish or Japanese or Arabic. Are there?
I'm not aware, yes, I mean, but I think there are other models in maybe other disciplines, and I'm gonna turn the question back to you. I'm sure there are other, last time we had this conversation in gender studies, for example, there's this issue of how to translate gender and so on and so forth. So has there been any attempt to do something similar in other disciplines into Arabic? And maybe you or your student or your center has been involved in something like that we can really look up to as a model for us. But in terms of other models in other languages, I haven't researched. I mean, honestly, this is very preliminary, let's say, dreamy stage. We're sort of setting the stage. We're, sharing with you the issues and our concerns and our very roughly drawn roadmap. But there's a lot of work to be done. And I think the first workshop, once we invite Madam Mas, we invite somebody from the Center of Translation or some professional translators, as well as half a dozen of practitioners, and we sit around the table and we just discuss, like, where do we go from there? Is it really, how far, and what are the lists, and what's the next step? And so all these questions of how to do it is something that we need to experiment, and I think it will be more of a roundtable discussion as opposed to a lecture. So in a way we feel a bit awkward because we're sharing with you something that's not very cooked. I mean, the previous project that we did are in a state of either completion or at least close to being completed, but the Lexicon project is something that we're still contemplating, and we're talking to Samia, we're talking to Lina, we're talking to other people about it, and we're getting different messages. And some people are like, you're just too ambitious. It's not even, maybe, or too naive. You have to be a little bit more, practical and realistic about your capacity. So, but we're still planning to give it, because I think there's a need for that. Maybe the format will change, but I think there's a need to have this conversation, and we're just gonna,
Well, the only thing I would add to that is that we are still planning it, and it's going to be in the fall. And so if anybody here is interested in participating, again, come up and let us know, because that's the next phase is to actually host the workshop with Center for Translation Studies, which will be in this room. And we haven't selected a date yet, but it will be this coming fall.
So if you are interested, you should go to that.
Exactly.
Because it is going to be a small group.
Mm-hmm.
So that it becomes a fruitful conversation. So if you're seriously interested, please get back to me so that we can target you then.
Great. We also have a number of cards for the website. We just forgot to put it out. We're gonna put it here. If somebody is interested in some of the websites that we've developed, we'll put them up on the table.
What we can actually do is create a list outside in our guest book now for the workshop. And
Mm.
we write your name and email so that we know that this is a core group that is interested in the workshop when it happens in the fall.
Great. That's it.
Thank you so much. I hope that we actually
Thank you
Thank
so
you all.
much. Thank you.